This is one of the cheapest EVs with over 300 miles of range that money can buy. This is the 2026 Chevrolet Equinox EV, and it's not even the cheapest EV that Chevrolet builds. That would be the Bolt. However, the Equinox starts at just $35,000 and features over 300 miles of range, making it the most valuable. Let me explain. Let's talk high-level value. Now, in my opinion, 300 miles of range is the magic number that an EV needs to cross to be considered more than just a city vehicle. For example, that Chevrolet Bolt I mentioned earlier is in fact cheaper than this Equinox EV. However, it features a stated range of 262 miles, which on paper sounds great, might even be enough for most people. However, stated range is ideal range in perfect conditions, and real-world range tends to be 10 to 20% less than that stated figure because it's affected by all sorts of things like weather, driver tendencies, or accessory usage like air conditioning. So once you cross that 300-mile range, things start to look a lot more usable. Things like city-to-city road trips become easier, you're now charging less between driving sessions, and most importantly, an EV starts to look like it really could be your only vehicle. Next, let's talk powertrains, in which case the Equinox EV is actually offered with two. And the cool part is both powertrains are actually offered across all three trims. So whether you buy the cheapest one or the most expensive one, you can go with either option. The first one, of course, is a single motor, which is front-wheel drive, and the other being a dual motor, which is all-wheel drive. Now, starting with the single motor, that's rated for 220 horsepower and 243 pound-feet of torque, and features up to 319 miles of range according to Chevy, which is fantastic in the real value proposition. The other being the dual motor is rated for 300 horsepower and 355 pound-feet of torque. It is of course faster, but they share the same 85 kilowatt hour battery, and therefore the dual motor is only rated for up to 285 miles of range on a single charge. That of course making the front-wheel drive, what we have here today, the ideal choice in my opinion in terms of the best value. But if you live in a maybe snowy area, rains, or areas where traction is not always available, all-wheel drive does seem to make the most sense. Now, in terms of charging, it's offered with both AC and DC charging. AC being the slowest, Chevy says you can expect around 36 miles of range per hour, which is fine if you have a house or a place to keep the vehicle and charge it for long periods of time. And then DC charging, you could actually quick charge it for 77 miles in just 10 minutes, which is fantastic, especially when you consider that the EV landscape is ever expanding with more chargers seemingly popping up everywhere, making it more usable as a daily driver. Now, in terms of the packaging, as you can see here, just like a combustion engine, your engine bay space here is taken up by things like your batteries and other electrical components, making none of the advantages that you usually see on more expensive EVs like the skateboard packaging and the very efficiency packaging that gives you extra storage up here, not really a thing here. Now, this is pretty common to see this layout in cheaper EVs like the Equinox around this price range, and you do usually have to spend more, as I mentioned, but still not bad when you consider that this is an SUV and still a very, very practical vehicle. Next, let's go ahead and take a closer look at the exterior of the Equinox EV, but first, the key. This is the key, pretty standard Chevy key, lock, unlock, remote start, the power rear lift gate, and of course a panic button. Some cool things about the Equinox EV specifically is also going to be the fact that when you unlock it, for example, you can see the flush door handles pop out, but also the cool sort of approach lighting that pops up on this vehicle. Now, this vehicle in particular is an RS, which is the top most expensive trim, and it's going to be more standard equipment and specifically some different cosmetic options as the RS tries to be a little bit more sporty. So you get things like this sort of fake carbon fiber that you see throughout here and even the RS badging. But all in all, there's some standard focus equipment I want to talk about for the Equinox, which of course includes LED lighting on the vehicle. But then you also have some standard SUV features, things like the roof rails and even a fair bit of ground clearance that you'd expect, making it a bit more practical, including the overall form factor, which isn't the biggest on the planet, but has plenty of practicality with two rows, and of course the rear for additional storage. Some other interesting areas for the RS, of course, would be the larger wheel packages, slightly more appealing cosmetics in terms of the overall finish, fully power adjustable heated mirrors. Our charger port is here on the driver's side. Some other cool features also include the badging. I think this is kind of a nice touch. The Equinox is also offered as a combustion engine version, and adding these 3 bars to sort of spell the name but imply that this one is EV, I think is also a pretty cool touch. You also also have plenty of cameras throughout the vehicle. Some of the interesting things includes the doors. While I can appreciate that when locked or in, they are of course fairly flush and aerodynamic, they're a little bit interesting to use because you don't really have a solid grab point, and this material on the back is admittedly a little bit slippery, and so it's just a little bit odd. It's hard to describe unless you actually experience it. Moving on to the back here, it's a little bit sporty with the rear spoiler, but it's also a power liftgate. Full LED lighting in back as well, more of the badging, and you can even either touch it down here to go ahead and lift up the rear power hatch, use the remote, whatever the case is. Lots of cool functionality. In back, fairly practical due to the sort of swept back sporty nature of the shape. You of course lose some of that verticality, but you can always fold down those rear seats if you need additional storage. All in all, a pretty generic form factor, let's say, but popular for a right reason. And here they make great use of that, just both in EV and combustion form. Next, let's take a closer look at the interior. In this case, the RS trim does have some cool options. Things like the faded components here that come with this trim, in addition to all of the red accents on these cool vents, the steering wheel, the RS badging, but then even the seats, of course, stand out a little bit more with the RS embossed in the headrest, and even the cool red, blue, and sort of white silver stitching with more red and black accents. So that is all specific. It doesn't do a whole lot in terms of the actual comfort. The seats themselves are pretty straightforward and standard with no bolstering, interestingly enough, so they're not really designed to hold you in place during spirited driving, but more so going for a more open effect to make them kind of comfortable to anybody in any body type. Some other interesting features in that while the driver's seat can often be powered, things like a powered passenger front seat are in fact optional, available in certain equipment packages. Moving on to some of the other details here, things like the memory settings also offered in certain optional packages, which this car has. You also get full power windows, power mirror adjustments, and if we go ahead and climb into the vehicle, you can see some of the interesting effects, of which there is no power button in this vehicle. So as you get in with the key in your pocket, everything just powers up right away. So as you can see here, we have our two main displays that has all of our functionality. The interesting part to me about that as well is when you first see the center screen, this thing is huge, but more about that in a moment. Now this does have some classic Chevy features. Things like the steering wheel are very, very thick, which is a nice Chevy classic touch, but then you'll also notice the functionality here of everything ingrained into the steering wheel itself. So you have also your functionality for the infotainment, you have your heated steering wheel as you can see on this particular example, but also the ability to actually function through this main dash here and bring up all sorts of different effects as you can see for whatever suits you best while driving the vehicle. On the other side here is going to be your cruise controls, a lot of your driver safety assist settings, as you can see, all in there. One interesting aspect of the steering wheel is that it's actually asymmetrical, and that is while some vehicles have paddle shifters, over here only on the left side is actually this battery, which is essentially sort of a regen switch. So when you can toggle that on for the vehicle, you can actually of course choose a more aggressive braking so that the vehicle kind of comes to a stop as soon as your foot is lifted off the accelerator, trying to regen more of that energy. Behind that you actually have your stock here on the left side, but on the right side is actually your shifter, and the way that this thing works is essentially you just bring it forward and then down to put it in drive, forward and up to put it in reverse, and then you push this button on the outside to put the vehicle in park. So all of that is pretty straightforward. Some other cool features on the RS being a bit more luxurious. Not only do you have this main display, but it's also paired with this actual heads-up display, as you can see there, that is pretty informative. It'll tell you speed limits, but also show you what systems the car is using in terms of its lane judgment, which is all incredibly helpful as well. On top of that, to the left here, you'll notice an array of physical buttons, not of which there is a whole lot in this car, but they're for pretty critical things that you might want to use on a regular basis, like your parking brake, to even the brake hold, and of course releasing that rear power hatch. Moving over here into the center section, this is where things start to get really interesting. Now, we do have this 17.7-inch TV-sized screen, but one really interesting aspect is that there's no CarPlay or Android Auto. If you're not familiar, General Motors as a whole has opted to develop their own system, which is what you're looking at here, that does not use CarPlay or Android Auto, instead opting for things like Google integration. Now, the benefit of that is you have, of course, Bluetooth and Sirius XM technology for standard smartphone pairing, but the real highlight being that you now get this Google system. Now, in my opinion, Most factory systems are not great that they develop in-house, but by integrating it with Google, you still have a fantastic navigation system, and so you can use that in combination with your smartphone connectivity for your own music or whatever the case is. Now, on top of that, there's an array of other features. Now, note that there is basically full of your functionality, I would say, is integrated into this system. Even if you take a look at the left here, you actually have things like the one-pedal driving assist are off to the side. There's some cool touch effects, I would say. It's rather easy to use, but most of the functionality is baked in. But to offset that, they actually have some quick navigation features up top here, things like your home menu, to even some of your basic vehicle settings that you might want to adjust on a regular basis, like the power window lockouts, your camera systems, etc. And then you also have, of course, the standard things like music, maps, phone connections, all that type of stuff. So that is a slight different change in terms of the interactions with the car. Now, the way they've done it here, I think is pretty good, because as you saw there, the system's pretty responsive. Everything pretty much works. This is also a volume knob here on the side, but then even just the main usability of it just feels pretty flawless. So I'm not really worried about it. The other cool part about the way that they designed this is that down low here is your climate control function. So as you can see, this car with its optional packages also has both cooled and heated seats, which is a pretty cool touch, in addition to some of your controls. Now, if you don't like these, fortunately, Chevy knows that the things you touch most, it's good to have physical controls for, and therefore down below here, these are all of your physical adjustments for your dual zone climate control. So you can adjust the temperature separately, but also the fan speed using these physical buttons if the touchscreen right here is not necessarily for you. But for the seats, that's touchscreen only. Kind of an interesting integration, but I think they did it the right way, kind of walking a line between the two. Moving on below that, you do have a wireless charger and a bit of a cubby hole here. Over here, you have an additional storage spot, which seems to be perfectly sized for a cell phone, while also integrating USB chargers. You have your cup holders here, and then of course you also have this section here, which comes with some additional storage that you can move around. But then because it's an EV, you have even more storage underneath thanks to its very compact packaging, and therefore there's no transmission taking up that space. As you take a look at the rest of the vehicle, pretty straightforward on the passenger side, including some additional pockets, but even the glove box. And then up top here, you have your mirror that also works as a camera mirror, and even some of your typical OnStar stuff. Your sun visors here, which seem appropriately sized for the car and are also backlit. All pretty great. There's a lot of things to like in this vehicle. Now, this one is the most expensive, but it's cool to see that certain functionalities, things like the camera mirrors, even the massive displays, heated and ventilated seats, most of those are things that you would expect to be on a significantly more expensive car. And the fact that you can get it optioned on the higher trim vehicles, i.e. the LT2 and here in the RS, it's nice to see that there's a lot of options in terms of what you can really get for your money here in the RS. Moving on to the back seat, the RS has a similar finish here in back with the fading and even the seats combined with the red-blue stitching, but also you get this nice little red and black hue with some extra padding to make the back seats a little bit more comfortable. But the really cool part is if we climb in, we can see how it fits. Now, with the driver's seat set up for me and even moved back for the comfort features at 6 foot even, I have plenty of room. You can see my head doesn't touch the top, but my knees aren't even close to the back of the seat either, which is great because that means you can fit full-size adults here in the back of the Equinox. But it doesn't stop there, because you also get some nice comfortable amenities, things like vents for the rear passengers, and if you go with some of the upgrade packages, you can also get heated seats like this one has for the outboard seats, make it better for colder climates, things like that, while also having some chargers. So very practical here in the back seat of the Equinox, making it a very usable EV, or just more storage space if you fold these seats down and back. So what's it like to drive the Chevrolet Equinox EV? Let's stomp on it. So it's not like super quick by EV standards, but I would say this is plenty to keep up with any sort of combustion equivalent of this vehicle. 220 horsepower on paper for these front-wheel drive examples is not a whole lot of power, but it's plenty of torque, and the difference is that as an EV, that power is always instantly available. It doesn't have to work its way up through the rev range. I imagine if you go with the all-wheel drive, it's pretty brisk and probably faster than the average vehicle on the road, but of course, you're getting that at the expense of a little bit of extra range. So in my opinion, the front wheel drive Equinox is the one to have, and that's what we're going to be driving today. Now, as far as the driving characteristics, at first glance, it feels pretty straightforward, and like a lot of the other modern vehicles of today, it's going to be hard to point out a lot of specific bad traits. Most vehicles are so well engineered and engineered to a much better, higher standard than vehicles of old. Things like the control arms and basic suspension components are so much more rigid and robust today that they result in these vehicles that can maintain higher speeds and can do more on average. Let's just say higher G turns, but also just maintaining higher speeds even on the freeways through whatever bumps might come your way. So, getting right into it even, going through the steering feels just fine. There's nothing I can think of that's wrong with it in any way. It feels pretty straightforward, just generally usable. It's hard to find something to dislike, I would say, in modern vehicles, unless it's really, truthfully, horrendously bad. This is pretty straightforward here. Little harmonic noises of the EV throughout. The other difference, I suppose, in this one being that we're driving it without the music on, so you might hear certain quieter aspects of the vehicle that you wouldn't normally hear if you had the radio going. Other than that, it's pretty nice. I like the little bit of redundancy between the heads-up display, the main display, but then just the ease of use, I think, of the vehicle. I like that, you know, in some sense, it's not overly remarkable at any one thing, but it does a fantastic job as a value proposition. I kind of mentioned earlier that it's not even necessarily the cheapest EV that you can buy just from Chevy, but it is the best value, and that is where it is doing its best to shine. So with the front-wheel drive variant, it's not the fastest EV out there, but it does have, let's say, some of the most range for the money. And that's the sweet spot, because you can buy a vehicle like this, and what you get is now a usable vehicle that could be your only vehicle as an EV that has the added benefit of a functional 2 rows. You can fit adults in the back, which means if this was going to be your family hauler, dropping the kids off throughout the week, but you could still take it on a trip to the next town over on the weekend. And so I think that's the truly impressive part about this vehicle. Now, as far as which one you buy, that's the other cool part. If you buy the cheapest front-wheel drive version, you get all the hardcore benefits that you would expect from this vehicle, and by going for the RS or even the LT2 in the middle, you can get some more luxurious packages if you wanted to upscale. I would say the Equinox is almost like a pair of jeans in that sense. It kind of works in every scenario, and you can dress it up if you want, or you could just use it as the robust, utilitarian, friendly value thing that it is. And that's really what this is. It's a nice pair of jeans that can fit a variety of different scenarios. So I would truthfully say, if you were looking for a mid-size compact SUV EV, this has to be one of the most compelling options on the market at the moment. I especially like that as a more SUV-oriented vehicle as opposed to a smaller sedan or whatever. It's also a bit more practical in that sense in living in a SUV-dominated market. But with that, that's pretty much all I have to say on this vehicle. Like I said, it's not overly remarkable in any one particular aspect. I think it's handsome looking, but more importantly, is functional, practical, and very value-friendly. With that, that's the end of the video. If you enjoyed it and could leave me a thumbs up, I'd really appreciate it. Consider getting subscribed for more content like this in the future. Of course, let me know your thoughts down below on the 2026 Chevrolet Equinox EV. And with that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.